be nosy, but you don't wear like a 36 or 38, 32, do you?
No,
Okay. I've got two pairs of
I
pants.
wear 40.
Oh, don't be.
They might be a 40, but I don't know.
Yeah, I
Oh,
do. I do.
I was thinking you'd be a 38.
Well, I was thinking 36.
Yeah.
Well, see,
Depends on-
y'all both used to be right.
We used to be right.
Both used to be right.
Yeah, I got you.
Now,
It's been
I
a while.
won't say anymore.
Right. I understand.
I won't say anymore.
Well, I kept them because I thought you might could wear them.
Oh, okay.
Now I know.
Are they elastic?
No, but we can put some in it.
I don't like them.
I hear you.
A nice new hair.
I've had it, I just don't always do it.
What?
Sometimes I wear it up, or if I've been working, I don't do it. But I actually washed it. Dried it.
Ooh.
Thank you. Where did y'all get to Sunday?
I think verse 25 up to 23. That's all I got more.
I didn't hear you, what'd you say?
I've got, chapter 23, verse 25,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
I may not be about it.
Well, we're supposed to finish up the book of Matthew tonight.
What?
I said, today's last class here. Is Scott our last class? I think so. Yeah. Okay. And your class to start Sunday? I thought they did. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
I was thinking
That's not the
started
first
Thursday
Friday.
night, but
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong about that. Okay. Anyway, Mark, you just be ready to finish up the job. Well.
Hello. Yeah, just running away under this.
you don't live in an aisle over here.
Uh-huh.
No aisle over here.
Mm-hmm.
Are you?
Yeah.
Good. Huh? Very invited, didn't invite back, so.
Okay. Is he having a party too?
Morning. Morning. I guess I'm really wanting to sleep. Your head.
All right, hello, hello. Oh, here you go.
America. They're good, I see them, because they're all the way in Tampa. But, well, they went to school there, but he's from there. They're gonna be there. I lost her to Tampa. She said she had a big presentation today.
No, it is true. I don't think so. I see her. I'm headed that way.
We got a little bit of everything.
Jersey.
It is.
So now, what is this? What is what?
It's
It's a wolf. Yeah. There you go. I wonder what team it's from.
I think it's from North. Somewhere in Arkansas. I think.
It'll be hard to come. Are they gonna miss all your friends?
Arkansas State, maybe? What are they?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, how are you?
All right, good to see everybody. Hope everybody's week is going well. We are starting in Matthew 23 tonight. Get over here and tell you what verse we're at. Come on. Matches your shirt. Before we begin, John, you mind leading us in a word first?
Sure. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity that we have to come in the middle of the week and to study your word. We ask that you would please be with us in this study. Open our eyes and open our ears and open our hearts as to what you would have us to understand from what we're going to study tonight. Please be with Rob as he teaches us, that he would remember the things that he has prepared and teach in such a way that we would understand as well. Thank you for your son Jesus and everything that he's done for us. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you, John. So, again, starting in Matthew chapter 23, we got down to, I don't have my verse here, but actually, it's about 4 or 5. So, we're finishing up. Again, we talked about we're on the last week of Jesus' life here. So, we're going to see some pretty heavy dialogue back and forth between the scribes and Pharisees and Jesus. You know, we've seen multiple times how the Jewish leaders would come to Jesus and question him, try to trip him up, just to catch him in error. We saw at the end of chapter 22, verse 46, the last time they asked Jesus a question, he silenced them, and then it says in verse 46, and no one was able to answer him a word, nor from that day on did anyone dare question him. So they understand that Jesus is going to be able to answer and refute any of their trick questions, so to speak, and they've come to the realization that they're just not going to answer that. He has a large following with the multitudes. We've seen that. Again, that's got to create some jealousy and envy with the Jewish leaders, and they don't like it for sure. And we see Jesus here in chapter 23. He's talking to the multitudes and his disciples, and he's basically, in this whole chapter, he's going to have a controlled response to them, but it's going to crescendo into almost the greetings in the marketplace, and, you know, men calling them rabbi and rabbi. That term rabbi in the first century was kind of like or equivalent to our term of doctor or professor. But again, their pride was definitely one of their principal sins, and Jesus is going to point that out as we go along here. In verses 8 through 10, he uses the word one here. Somebody read those verses. Kim, just read 8 through 10 for us.
But you do not be called rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brethren. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. And do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ. But we who is greatest among you shall be your servant.
Okay, yeah, so this word one, you know, he's telling them that these titles they're using, like rabbi, teacher, and father, they're not to use them anymore on earth. Why is that?
God.
Yeah, God is our true Father, our true authority, not them as teachers. So, sidebar, is there any place you can think of in the New Testament that has several ones listed? Yes. What? Ephesians 4? Y'all say it? One body, one spirit, one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. So, similar there, pointing to God, the Godship, the head, having that ultimate authority. All right, and then in verse 12, it kind of sums up this section, telling them what? What does he say to them in verse 12?
And whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted.
Yeah, so we've seen Jesus' attitude on this, on being humble, throughout Matthew. I can't make my U work there. You know, how's our humility? How do we act in certain situations? Are we humble? Can we do a better job at this? You know, we go through, I'm just going to write some words on the board for us to think about how we are doing in the humility attitude or characteristic. So think about that, and then we'll make some more application. Any other comments on verses 1 through 12? All right, and then we get into this section in chapter or verse 13 through 26 or 36, really, that has this 8 woes. And, you know, woe can be something like you're talking about sadness or you're lamenting, but in this section, it's more of a judgment on the wicked. So, like I said, it's going to start, not necessarily soft, but he's definitely got a crescendo to the end of this. So, we're going to kind of go through these, and it's going to seem a little repetitive, but I think we need to at least look at these and kind of follow the trail, so to speak. So, he says in verse 13, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in." Verse 14, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers, therefore you receive the greater condemnation." So, you know, we see these woes here, and, you know, Jesus tells them, what's the first thing he tells them in verse 13? What does he call them? Yeah, so, you know, we haven't really talked about this from an application standpoint. What is a hypocrite?
Says one thing and does something else.
Yeah, are we Christians on Sunday and hypocrites on Monday? I mean, how do we act? This is one of the core problems with the Jewish leaders and how they were acting, saying one thing and then not living the lifestyle that they were rebuking people for. So I think it's very incumbent on us to, you know, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we saying? How are we living? Do we say one thing and then do another?
I think his warning also in verse 13 is about being a hypocrite, you're keeping people out of heaven.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of this figurative thing where, they're kind of figuratively standing at the gate and people are trying to come in and they're like closing the gate on them. So, you know, I think that's very good for us too. You know, a lot of times you might say, well, I don't talk or I don't say anything hypocritical. Our talk, our speech doesn't reflect that. But we've talked about this. What are our actions show? I mean, we may not say anything, but what are we doing? A lot of times people can see conflict. Oh, you go to church on Sunday and you talk like that at work? You know, do what? Or not doing, yes. That's a big one too. If you're professing to do something and you just your actions don't show that you live that type of life. So, again, Jesus is going to get loud with him. So, the other part of that, our actions, what do our actions do a lot of times? Not only do they show what we are, but they're going to be an influence. Okay? So, if we're doing good things, then people are going to, hopefully be influenced by that. But if we're doing bad things, we could possibly be influencing others to do bad things as well. So,
Everybody's watching you.
yeah,
From
exactly.
the younger to the older, and how you acting on a daily basis.
Yeah, so actions, influence, example, those are all things that as Christians we have to look at, we have to think about. The second one, verse 14, how did they demonstrate their greed, the scribes and Pharisees?
Outward long prayers.
Yes, that's one thing. But, they were also apparently devouring widows' houses, which, typically in Scripture we see widows as, objects of care and concern. But the Pharisees and scribes are, I don't know if they're exploiting, widows' houses through foreclosure or scams or somehow, betraying their financial trust. I don't know exactly, but, I don't think Jesus would be accusing them of doing this if they weren't doing something like that. So, and then as we talked about, doing these long prayers, if our motives, talked about this, if our motive for doing a good deed or helping somebody is just to get the pats on the back or the verbal confirmation or the verbal praise, then we're doing it for the wrong reason. Just like the scribes and Pharisees here are secretly, telling people to take care of the widows, but yet they're stealing from them. And then the condemnation for these long prayers as well.
Basically, know the Pharisees, the ones that wanted everything to point at them and get the power, sometimes money. We don't know what this is referring to exactly, but it makes you wonder if they were just withholding people helping the widows and not letting them get things that they need, and then that would shut them down, shut the widows down, and lose their homes. And
could be.
I mean, maybe it's all speculation.
Right.
I
Yeah.
always wonder, when I read 23, it just reminds me so much of the Catholic Church. They just are a shadow of that. And, they really go after widows in the Catholic Church of them leaving everything to the church in their will. And they really go after them.
Really? I didn't know that.
Especially when they have no one.
No
to leave
heirs.
it to.
Yeah.
And they'll even step in and say, if there's no will, that, and I remember this happened with your uncle, and he had to buy it from the Catholic Church, the house. But, because she didn't have a will, and so they stepped in and
Just
said,
take it basically
she was
almost.
going to give it to us.
Oh, wow.
But I just don't know. I mean, maybe that's just me, but I just feel like I just see the Catholic Church when I read about the Pharisees and Sadducees, and I always think, was the Catholic Church started because they didn't want to lose their position, but yet they believed in Jesus, they came around, believed in Jesus, but yet they still wanted all that position and all the higher levels and hierarchy, and they still wanted all the dress and the
all the stuff we see here.
They wanted still all, and I always wondered if that was why it was started. I always wonder.
Yeah.
An example of what Jesus says earlier was, when you're praying, do it in secret. When you're helping others, do it in secret.
Yeah.
Because it's not for outward appearance.
Outward, yeah.
It's to be a servant. So,
yeah. Yeah, that's another key word for tonight that we're going to just put up there. We got humble, servant. So we talked about that, those long, pretentious prayers or whatever that verb is. But, we talked about secretly praying, going in your closet, getting on your knees, praying to God. You don't want people to see that. That's between you and God, and you just, kind of pour your heart out to God. I think that's very healthy, quite frankly, and I was almost going to say therapeutic, but it may be some of that both. But I think that is something that would strengthen your prayer life and strengthen your faith.
Yeah, and as Catholic, you pour your heart out to the priest.
Yeah, right.
God.
Yeah, yeah.
They
want to be that
relationship.
intermediary, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's read, 15 and 16. Megan, you want to read those for us, please? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Verse 15. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites! For you cross land and sea to make one convert, and then you turn that person into twice the child of hell you yourselves are. Blind guides! What sorrow awaits you? For you say that it means nothing to swear by God's temple, but that it is binding to swear by the gold in the temple.
Yeah, so this first one in 15 is interesting. Why would the person be worse off if they go to all this trouble to convert? First of all, what was the proselyte?
What if they converted to Judaism that wasn't a Jew?
Yeah, exactly. And so they're gonna go travel across the world, so to speak, and then convert him. And then why would Jesus say that he's worse off?
You turn him into a hypocrite just like you.
Yeah, exactly. You turn him into somebody just like, well, he's condemning here. And if they would have just converted him to the Jewish faith, I mean, that would have been okay. But what they're wanting is, again, somebody like them, who Jesus is going to just go on to totally, just again, condemn and, call them hypocrites and blind, just over and over in this whole chapter. So they're not doing it for the right reasons. They're not converting them to the right thing. And then in 16, he talks about blind guides. And he goes on this whole thing of, why did Jesus condemn their picky distinctions, I guess, in swearing oaths? Any ideas on that? It's like their whole attitude again. They were, the Jewish oath formulas were nothing but a hypocritical cover-up for dishonesty. They're saying to do all these things, but yet they have become such these champions of these small distinctions, and that's why Jesus calls them fools and blind over and over again. So,
Let your yes be yes and your no be no.
yeah, exactly. Same message that he gave them in chapter 15 as well about this, and we'll see more of kind of the same thing as we go down here through the woes.
I think they were a little bit like off their game. They had gotten away from the spiritual part of it. The temple was sanctified, the altar was sanctified, all of those things that they were saying you swear by these, but they don't mean anything. But if you swear by the gift that's given, or the gold coin, or the tangible worldly item, rather than the spiritually sanctified item, then it means more to you. So where does your allegiance lie?
Yeah.
With the world?
Yep, exactly, yeah. And you quoted a lot of 17 through 22 there, which he talks about. So, again, just more of their characteristic traits that Jesus is just kind of really dissecting and tearing apart here. Let's read verse 23. John, do you mind reading that, please?
Just 23?
Yes, sir.
Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and amides and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought you have done, and not to leave the others undone.
Read 24 too, I'm sorry.
You blind guides, which strain at a gnat and swallow a camel.
Yeah, so kind of in the previous verses, he condemns their overemphasis of these particular things, like this anise and cumin, and they're neglecting what?
Justice and mercy.
Yeah, that's the big thing, justice, mercy, and faith. So he gives this example in verse 24, you strain out a gnat and then you swallow a camel. That makes no sense. Both of these animals, if you want to call them that, were unclean, so to speak. And, you have this picture of somebody who's taking all this time to, dig through there and find this little bitty gnat, and then they gulp down this big chunk of camel, So any examples you could put on that, like for us today? What's something we could do like this today, maybe, that you think of could be a problem? Or just any type of example?
Squabbling over petty doctrinal things when we're not even taking care of the people in our congregation.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I was gonna say like similar to that, but you know, if we're so bent on just filling out every blank in the lesson, and you know, we have to have it done because somebody beside me may see my blanks on the page, but yet we don't practice any of it. It's just like we're so worried about if somebody sees a blank on my lesson, but yeah, we don't worry about actually doing our actions as well. So the heavier matters, you know, the actions, the living, the heart aspect of what you're doing in Christianity. So, are we guilty of any of that? I mean, again, that's just something to self-examine on. But you know, it was very clear, I think, to Jesus, I think, and to the multitudes, how they were acting. And when he's bringing this all out, I think a lot of the people may have had their eyes open and said, wow, they are doing that. So any other comments on that?
Jesus is absolutely holding nothing back here.
Yeah.
I mean, his language is offensive, honestly. Like, he's making fun of them. He's taking snide, sarcastic comments, like the one about the camel. Like, he is holding nothing back. He's just going after these people. And I think that there is definitely a time and a place to use strong language against people that are just so stubborn and just can't see it. I mean, we see Paul do the same thing with the Galatians. He just he goes after them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there is a time to really be direct with people, and you know, it's like I said, he's not mixing words here for sure. So
he's also getting them for focusing on the wrong things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had thought of both of those animals are technically unclean.
Yeah.
To me, it has a whole different way of behind it, I think, but you may get hammered by somebody because you didn't wear a tie. Or something.
Yeah, no,
if I don't wear a tie, somebody may hammer me. That same person may not hardly ever come to church. That one time they come, they don't know where it's at, and you absolutely hammer me for not wearing a tie.
Good example, yeah.
And you're like, well, you don't ever come to church. Like,
right.
You know,
yeah.
You're focusing on the wrong thing here.
Yeah.
That's a weird example that comes to my mind, but
that's a good one. Similar.
I think it's interesting that you said that about them both being unclean. Focusing on the wrong things anyway, but both of them are wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think we could add. I think we could add heart, you know, to this, to our list of words, because they're not focusing on their hearts. They're not focusing on what is true, on their faith. They're totally neglecting that. So.
They're also focusing on things that they think matters.
True. Yeah.
It matters to them, but it's not really pertinent to God to, you know, make it a law or whatever.
Yeah. Who wants to read verse 20? Verse 25.
Well, to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of extortion and self-indulgence.
And 26.
Blind Pharisee, first cleanse the inside of the cup and dish, that the outside of them may be clean also.
Okay, so I mean, this is very simple. We've looked at this. They obviously were they wanted to be correct on the outside appearance, but inside they were dirty. Again, similar to discussion in chapter 15 around outward and inward cleanliness. So they may have looked good on the outside. They were going to make sure they looked good on the outside, but inwardly they were definitely full of all this self-indulgence, this extortion we talked about. So our question for us is, how do we look on the outside and inside? You know, are we saying things, I mean, just like repetitive of what I've been talking about, saying and doing, or if God looks at our heart, does he see what we're professing, so to speak, by being here and, you know, showing our faith? So I think we've all got to examine our heart more and just make sure we're clean on the outside and the inside.
The book emphasizes that he calls on them to clean the inside, the heart, and the soul first.
Yeah.
Focus on that first.
Yeah, and that should be our priority. You know, we could also talk about priorities, you know, in this. we see what the Pharisees' priorities were, so to speak, impressing others, all of their pride and pomp and circumstance. But, we might look at it as hey, what are our priorities? Am I, spending that extra time at work to get ahead? Am I, focusing on extracurricular activities or my hobbies? But yet, I'll pull my lesson out Sunday morning while I'm eating breakfast and just kind of read over it. How many times a week am I reading my Bible? Am I praying? So that's all something for us to consider and think about as we live our lives. Any comments? Okay, so this is actually verse 26. Actually, I'm sorry, 27. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bodies and uncleanness. So, similar to what we're talking about in the cup, they're talking about these whitewashed tombs. It was a custom in that time that, I think Ryan actually talked about this some on Sunday, where they would clean these tombs, the outside of them, so people wouldn't walk on them or step on them, because it wasn't like they had squared off cemeteries. A lot of times these burial places could have been in a lot of different areas, so you obviously wanted people to see them, but in seeing them, they're not looking, really what's beneath is this decaying body. So that's how he's describing them. Like Megan said, I mean, this is harsh language. They are getting, just lambasted here to them, and they've got to be, getting very upset at this point. I would think that's just my conjecture, but
I think part of the whitewashing of the tomb is also to tell everybody that this is unclean, don't touch it, which is a really interesting aspect on Pharisees as well.
Yeah.
They should be, the way they're acting, the way they're behaving, and things that they're doing, saying should be an alert to everybody else. Don't be around these guys.
Yeah, because I mean, they're looking at all their pomp and circumstance and all the prestige, but I mean, Jesus is telling them that they're spiritually dead. Again, that's very harsh language. So, I mean, when we think about that, when we consider ourselves spiritually dead, I mean, again, that goes back to our hearts, our example, our humility, our service. We have to look at where we are spiritually from a growth. If we're not growing, are we dying? All of those things are important for us to examine as we think about Jesus really, what would he say to us? How many woes would he say to us? I think that's a good way to look at it and how we're living. Any other comments on that? That's basically our woe section. 5 times in this section, Jesus calls them blind. We got 29 through 32 here, which is our last one. That's right. Sorry, I can't see it on my glasses. Eric, read 29 through 32 for us, please, sir.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Therefore, you are witnesses against yourselves, that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt.
Okay. So how does Jesus connect the guilt of those listening to him to the guilt of their fathers who persecuted and killed the prophets of old? How does he connect that in verse 31?
They're the sons of those that killed them?
Yeah, they're the sons of those who murdered the prophets. I mean, he condemns them for following that example of the past persecutors. Publicly they're giving this great respect to the prophets and the righteous men. They build these tombs of the prophets. They adorn the monuments of the righteous. Then at the same time, they're declaring their superiority over the ancestors who had slain the prophets. So he's telling them, he's exposing them that they are the true sons of their evil fathers. So again, very harsh judgmental language here. Verse 33, he calls them serpents, brood of vipers. How can you escape the condemnation? Again, very strong. He compares them to the most detestable animal, which would have been a snake. serpent, when this one is a poisonous one at that, which is a viper. So yes, this one.
He's pointing out, I think, in this last one, especially their hypocrisy when they're saying that they would never have been doing the same things their father had done, and yet, you know, they're fixing to kill
They're
him.
fixing to kill, yeah,
And
exactly.
the apostles and everything else.
Yeah.
And so it's just so much hypocrisy that they're showing there.
Yeah. Really, really bad hypocrisy. But then in verse 33, he says, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? Which I think really he's saying you're not going to escape it. So when you condemn them to hell, I mean, I think after this point, I think you know, their blood is going to be boiling throughout the end of this. And of course, you know, we're 3 days out basically from Jesus being crucified, so everything is definitely coming to a boiling point here. Verse 34 through 36. Jane, you mind reading that?
Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah and the son of somebody, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation.
Okay, so kind of as we get closer in the transition into 24, a lot of this is going to tie in with 24 when we start talking about their destruction upon this generation. What did he say? What things are about to come upon this generation in verse 35? All the blood of the righteous of the earth, really from A to Z, from Abel to Zechariah. So, again, a very condemning statement here. All these things are going to come upon this generation, he says in verse 36. And again, that'll tie in more to what we talked about with the destruction of Jerusalem and the condemnation in chapter 24. 37, I'll read that. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So Jesus kind of ends this whole section with kind of this, I don't know, I'm going to call it this beautiful language. Even after this harsh, you know, condemnation that he gives them, he kind of calms it all out with this, almost this lament type language. And this doubling of the name of Jerusalem, Jerusalem, it can indicate this emotion we saw with kind of like with David, oh Absalom, Absalom, you know, my son. Jesus here is grieved over the situation, the fate of Jerusalem, about what's about to happen or what he's about to tell them. And he kind of uses this analogy or this tender picture of a hen gathering her chicks under her wings. So what house was he referring to in verse 38? Says your house has left you desolate. I think he's referring to the temple here, which represents kind of the Jewish nation. We see in Ezekiel chapter 10 and 11 that God's glory leaves the temple and is no longer in his house, but now it's the Jews. So it's desolate. The temple is going to be desolate. It's going to be vacant, or it's going to be unoccupied by its owner, which is God. So
kind of a good segue into chapter 24.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, this whole chapter, we have a lot of judgment. The woes, you know, the persecution of God's messengers, the pronouncement of judgment on this generation, and then this declaration that God has left the temple, definitely very judgmental. And, you know, they're, if they have any hair left on their head from this scathing, you know, discourse by Jesus, I don't know, they've got to be very, very upset and very browbeaten, so to speak. So,
you know, Rob, the fun thing about all of this that we're reading is it's sort of I gotta be careful how to put this. It's sort of cool because Jesus is giving the people and the disciples an avenue not to be sheep, right? And what I mean by that is he's telling them that the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, and whatever they say, you shall do, you should do. So what their teachings are not wrong. It's the fact that they don't do the teachings, right? They say it, but they don't do it. They're hypocrites. And he comes back and he goes, you know, there is one God, there is one Christ, right? There is a teacher and a father. They're not here on earth, they're in heaven. He's giving the people, for really sort of the first time, he's giving them the opportunity not to be sheep here on earth and to follow men who are in it for the wrong reason.
Yeah, and and to that point, we kind of talked about that on Sunday, that, you know, Jesus, this whole approach, this whole teaching style would have been totally different from what the Jewish leaders had been doing. And so the multitudes would, you know, like we saw, they're astonished, obviously, at the wisdom that he has and how he's so much different. So, yeah, they are seeing something that's different from what they've been taught. And they do have the option.
You didn't dare go against them.
Right. Yeah, they're not going to question. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They were all authority here on earth, and you did not dare question, go against, call out, do. And this is all a changing of the guard. This is all, he's basically giving the multitudes and the people that he's talking to there, he's explaining, these are not the people that you follow. These are not your gods. These are not, you know, they're not treated that way. And that it's almost like a turning a revolution to a certain degree, right?
Yeah.
So,
definitely different for sure. Yeah.
Yep.
Let's read. We got a few minutes here. Let's read the first couple of verses of 24. Gina, do you mind reading those, please? Just 1 and 2.
Okay. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the building of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down."
Yeah, so we see here Jesus, I mean, this is pretty significant. He goes out of the temple. He departed from the temple, which he just said in verse 38, look, God's left the temple. I'm leaving the temple. So his public teaching really at this point is pretty much over. His only instruction is going to be given to the disciples at this point going forward. Again, he's only 3 days away from crucifixion. So what news does Jesus give them in verse 2 then?
Was the physical and the literal and
correct.
Figurative for him.
Yes. Yes.
The physical temple was going to be
right. True.
completely demolished. No stone would be set upon a stone.
Yeah.
But he was also in the realm that they couldn't understand, talking about the temple of his body.
True. Yes.
It was going to be
Spiritual.
Yeah.
And the Judaism.
Yeah, they can do that.
Right. So in verse 2, I mean, they're looking at all of this, Jerusalem and the temple, and, you know, they're kind of showing Jesus this, and they look at these huge stones and, you know, how magnificent the architecture is. And, you know, Jesus kind of probably said this, that had to astonish them to look, not one stone is going to be left. They shall be thrown down. So they probably jaws dropped and were like, you know, what in the world are you talking about here? Yes.
In Mark's account in Mark chapter 13, verse 1, it says, as Jesus was leaving the temple that day, one of his disciples said, "Teacher, look at these magnificent buildings. Look at the impressive stones in the wall." And I just can imagine Jesus shaking his head and being like, that day, it was that very same day that he just totally demolished the Pharisees for being concerned about earthly things. They walk outside and the disciples are like, wow, look how pretty everything is. This is so impressive.
Yeah.
And just, guys, you don't get it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that also goes back to, you know, what kind of emphasis do we put on earthly things? There might be some application there. Earthly possessions and things. Does that get in our way of serving God? Is that an idol? Is that a stumbling block? But yes, to your point, they totally missed it here, and we're just saying, wow, look how magnificent these buildings are. And then Jesus makes this very shocking point that not one stone is going to be left. They're going to be thrown down. So they're obviously concerned about that. And they come to Jesus in verse 3. And what two questions do they ask Jesus there in verse 3?
When and where's the sign?
Yeah. So, this is going to we can get kind of deep on this. And if somebody wants to, we can. But Mark and Luke, they talk about these two questions. Matthew says 3 questions. But really the second question asked is all kind of one question. What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So as we go on, Jesus is going to answer these questions in the remaining section of 24 and in 25. So we'll kind of see him answer those questions, but there's a lot of figurative and symbolic language here. But we'll kind of go through that as we go. We got like 2 minutes left, so I don't want to get into that. Why don't we just, Clay, we'll start with, I guess, verse, 5 or 6, on Sunday, and go from there. So
24 is so important to keep it in the context.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of the last couple of chapters as well, keep it in that context. Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions? All right. Thank you very much. Guess we can either go outside or talk quietly amongst ourselves.
No. Well, not yet. Too long.
Hey, you're in Rob. Nice to meet you, sir. What's your name? Rob Hurst.
Hey, Rob. Nice to meet you. You're like me. I can't do ages. I'll call. Is it your mom? No.
I would do it long. Well, hang it in there. Do any better this afternoon?
So long.
So, Arkansas State, but they don't really know the doctor said that is. They're the right way to do it. I was sitting there thinking on it. I was trying to remember what their mascot was. Arkansas State, baby.
September. Definitely praying. Hey, is that the best place for her? They talked about transferring her anywhere? Or?
I think we're holding the,
Clear that out.
yeah. And then, there's some functions, possibly, we are